Join us on a journey where we unravel the latest trends, tackle your burning questions, and explore innovative strategies that are shaping the future of compensation, all with a cup of coffee in hand. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Comp and Coffee. We've been talking quite a lot at Pay Scale this quarter around the language barriers that can exist around pay in an organization and the game of compensation telephone that sometimes goes on. Increasingly, more and more people are talking about compensation across the organization, and they often use different definitions, priorities, and assumptions. And that can lead to this cross wires sometimes in terms of what we really mean about compensation. And sometimes everyone thinks they're having the same conversation about pay, but they're not. Without shared meaning, even simple decisions become harder and trust can break down. And so today we're going to bring in some Pay Scale customers to the conversation to share their experiences. And we're going to think about how you can create a common language for compensation, why those misunderstandings happen, and what actually builds alignment instead of more meetings when it comes to determining pay. So let's bring in our guests today. We have Hannah and Kim joining us today. Hannah Beaver and Kim O'Grady, welcome very much to the Cup of Coffee podcast. Let's start with you, Hannah. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell me whether you're a coffee or a tea or what your favorite beverage is?
Yeah, so thank you, Ruth. Hannah Beaver, work for Trilogy Health Services, a large Midwest senior living company. Been in compensation for about 15 years now. And I think if it's a hot beverage, I want coffee. I prefer my coffee iced though, but if I'm in the mood for hot, then coffee it is. I do enjoy a nice like Earl Grey or Lady Grey tea though, if I'm in some kind of a fancy mood.
Earl Grey, it's one of my favorites. Well, thank you for joining us today, Hannah. And Kim, welcome. Tell us about yourself, who you work for, and what's your favorite beverage?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So, hi, I'm Kim O'Grady. I'm the compensation supervisor for designer brands, but most people know us for our retail arm, which is DSW. And yes, I own a lot more shoes than I'm willing to admit on a recorded podcast. At Designer Brands, we've got over 10,000 associates on the U.S. side across our retail stores, logistics centers, and a remote home office workforce. And I work on all sorts of comp, from the base to the incentive to the equity. And I always have my emotional support water bottle with me, which I will say is my Pay Scale water bottle.
Ooh. Well, you can't see us a podcast, but we have matching water bottles.
Yes, so. And then I always have my cup of coffee in the morning. But I have to stop drinking coffee at 2 because then that's too much caffeine for me.
Yeah, I'm the same. And you don't see us all on video at the same time on the podcast, but we are actually all wearing very autumnal or wintry hues, I would say. So I'm wearing burgundy. Kim, you've got a nice rich red on, and Hannah, you've got like a pinky red on. So we're kind of all matching each other today. That was wholly unintentional. So anyway, welcome to Comp and Coffee, and thanks for bringing your favorite beverages with you. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to focus on today. Why does misalignment around pay conversations and understanding around pay happen? Every function we know looks at pay differently through a different lens, and they sometimes shape conflicting priorities, timelines, and definitions. So Hannah, from your experience, where do you see misalignment between HR and leadership show up most clearly, and what happens when the meaning behind compensation concepts get lost?
Sure. So I talk in analogies, Ruth, and I think that compensation is very much like a Rubik's Cube. We're all trying to solve our own side, but if we're not working together, we're never going to solve the puzzle. And we do have different dialects. Our compensation is talking about market rates, finance as budget, operations says labor is a relation to revenue. And then we have our people leaders who are talking about vacancies and having those slots filled. And the misalignment happens most often when we're not looking at the entire puzzle, that entire Rubik's Cube. We're only looking at our side. And we see that, our little yellow box is a problem. We don't want yellow boxes, not realizing that the other side is saying, wait, we need all the yellow boxes. So for me as the compensation expert in the room is I'm trying to translate each person's perspective into one universal language that we can all understand and try and bring us all together. Not necessarily everyone speaking the same language, but at least us all understanding that we all have one shared goal and how can we achieve that through this one puzzle that we're trying to handle.
Great, thank you. And Kim, you work closely with both finance and HR teams. What's the biggest gap between how these groups interpret the same data?
Yeah, great question. So I do partner closely with finance, and we both look at compensation through two different but equally important lenses. So finance is coming in with the budget impact and how are we going to hit budget and what's the plan for next year and how do we get there? And we're coming there from a fairness and equity perspective. So we always like to, anchor back to what's the market saying. We're bringing lots of analysis in. They're bringing their analyses in, and then we're coming together and having some education conversations to make sure that we're all on the same page and make the right decision for the business.
I mean, I've often seen, the friction is from the HR compensation time, you're talking about like your need to invest in talent. And then maybe from the finance side, they're thinking of it as more of a cost, and how to control it. And I think that gap has happened because we haven't always been able to show like the true impact of how you invest in compensation. I don't know, Hannah, like misunderstandings consistently slow down conversations around pay and pay decisions. What are the kind of common misunderstandings that you've seen?
Usually, getting back to that, different dialect, misalignment isn't a failure. It's more of like an early warning system or early warning feedback. And where we see the biggest misalignment in my line of work right now is that kind of I just got this feedback earlier, and it's part of our growth as a team and as a partnership. I'm very close, fortunately blessed, very close with my CFO and COO, and they're able to talk to me about well, here's what you're bringing to the table, and here is why we may be resisted. Here's why we're misaligned. I'm able to give the same feedback to them. We need you to be a little less employee minded and more business minded, or I can say the same thing back to them. You're looking at it from this perspective. Have you thought about it from this perspective? Yes, we want to reach consistency and alignment, but let's talk about the psychology of pay. And that's another dialect or another perspective that comes into this conversation. We're talking about this universal language of pay. Employees are thinking fairness, and it doesn't really matter what our relationship is or our language is when we're talking about pay. If our employees walk away thinking that their pay isn't fair or the value that they're bringing to the company isn't matched by the value they're receiving back, we could talk till we're blue in the face in the boardroom, right? Our employees are still going to leave or stay. Um, so bringing that kind of like psychological conversation or perspective into this whenever we see those misalignments can sometimes help be our kind of North Star or our guiding moment.
Yeah, so you mentioned the psychology of pay there. So how does understanding the behavioral side help leaders align here?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, we're talking about kind of where we want to sit when it comes to our competitive pay. Healthcare in particular has very narrow margins, especially senior living, super narrow margins. Very little private pay and more Medicare and Medicaid type funding. So we have to be really careful with how we're spending that revenue. And when we're talking about psychology and pulling that perception in, that matters just as much, if not more, than the math. So coming in and saying things like, if we want to realign this bonus to this way that we're being consistent, do we need to do this in phases? Can we accomplish this all at once? Um, you know, the pitchforks and torches test. How angry is this going to make our employees? Because that's the opposite of what we want. When we're trying to do these initiatives, it's always with our employees' best interests in mind and that equality and that fairness.
And Kim, how do you feel about that? I mean, you're known for simplifying complex
Oh,
concepts.
yes.
What do you find helps non-experts understand pay well enough to act with
Oh,
confidence?
absolutely. So, I mean, we find this a lot when we're hiring for a role or we're looking at a promotion and we've got leaders going, I want to pay this associate X because that's frankly just what they asked for, or that's a meaningful increase. We hear that's a meaningful increase a lot. And so we have a simple recommendation worksheet that helps us to answer the questions of where are they going to sit in the range? How do they compare to their peers? What's their performance history? What's the budget impact? And so that helps us visualize pretty quickly. Oh, we're aligned. That's an easy offer. Yep, approve. We're going through. Or let's have some conversations, and then that's where we start to talk through. Here's what we see from a compensation side. Here's best practices, and then they come to us with, well, here's what's going on in the business. Here's what you don't see on paper that I can't put there, and so we know really quickly what conversations do we have to have and which ones we don't have to have, and we can approve quickly and move.
Ruth, Kim brought up something really important, and I think that's the education of our leaders or the
Yeah.
maturity of our leaders when they're talking about pay. Um, each of our campuses, and we have 130, 140 of them, they are little mini CEOs over their location. And they grew up learning finance. They grew up learning operations. They grew up learning all these regulatory stuff. Very rarely did someone sit down with them and say, here's how you talk about pay. Here's how you navigate these really complex psychological needs from your employees. So when our leaders speak in spreadsheets and our employees are hearing emotion, the leaders think they're explaining, but the employees just think they're being punished or
Yeah.
that they're not getting what they need. So one of the biggest things that we're trying to tackle right now is helping grow that maturity of our leaders, the fluency of pay and compensation, and helping them understand that their employees are humans and where they're coming from and how these messages are received. And that's been really key as we move forward.
Yeah. And I like, Kim, when you were talking about how each side, like the managers, and then obviously you in HR and compensation, bring different sides to this. So we're kind of explaining how we think the compensation philosophy plays out. But there, as you said, bringing in the other aspects of, we know that you might have the best compensation philosophy out there and you might have your compensable factors very clearly articulated, but people are still people, and there are often like reasons why you're paying someone or having to do something with someone's pay that may not be like 100% aligned with your compensation philosophy. I don't know, how do you both feel about that, Kim? Is that something that you come across quite a lot?
It happens. I want to be like, we're probably like 3/4 of the time, everything's good. Those are easy. And then there's that 1/4% of the time where it's truly, you have to have a conversation because you can't put everything down on a piece of paper. And while that's our philosophy, and we don't try to make exceptions because that exceptions create complexity and we don't like to create complexity, but there's conversations to be had. And so it's making sure we're experts and all the experts are coming to the table and making the right decision for the business and for the associate.
Yeah, and I think, the age of pay transparency is making these conversations so much easier, because compensation was really very much a secret or like a black hole. No one really ever understood like how pay was determined because it just wasn't talked about. And so in that environment, you can see why like managers or TA or like people would just like throw numbers in because there was no context. They were really just thinking about the immediate need in front of them. So, that really has changed as we all start to think more about like what are the things that drive pay differentiation in our organization. That's what we need to be aligned around. That's what our conversation needs to be around. But at the same time, like knowing that people are still human and they can't always be quantified to like a set of compensable factors and then a number. So let's talk about this friction. You both mentioned pay fairness, like that's what employees think about pay fairness. But that can often lead to friction against like budget limits, for example. How do you find agreement between like managing budget, thinking about prioritizing cost versus ensuring pay fairness? I don't know, Kim, do you want to start us off
Sure.
there?
Sure. So those are questions that we face a lot in retail. If there's a lot of friction of what funds do we have that we can spend and give back to our associates, and it's so important from an HR and talent perspective that we have good programs in place to attract and retain talent. And so we come with that lens very often with our market data to support it. And then finance is coming with, these are the numbers we have to hit for next year. These are the budgets. This is how much we have to cut, or this is how much we have to spend. And so we have to have a lot of talks about what's affordable for next year. And we also talk about, where do we get creative? So sometimes, okay, well, if I make this change in the beginning of the year, I'm now impacting the whole annual budget. Versus if I make the change 6 months into the year, now I'm only impacting a fiscal impact of 6 months. And so we try to find what's the balance between both of our needs so that the business and the associates both win.
Yeah. And Hannah, what happens when leaders understand the numbers but not the reasoning behind them? How do you rebuild credibility like when that happens?
Yeah, so there are many times when our leaders don't quite understand where we get the numbers, and as we move towards pay transparency, things are getting better. You're right, Ruth. It's almost like there was this perception that the compensation team would go into a cave and breathe mystic vapors and come out with wage scales, right? Um, and that's not really the case anymore. A quick Google search can tell you any number of wage ranges, whether they're accurate or AI generated. Um, so one of the things that I'm a PayFactors customer, and one of the things that I really enjoy is being able to pull up all of our market data in one place, sit down with a leader. I just went through this probably last week. We're working on a sales bonus, and we all know that sales incentives are exceedingly tricky. And trying to find a way that we can pay these employees the base salary that is marketable and build a variable incentive plan that's going to get them where we need them in their total cash without knowing quite yet how much that bonus is going to pay, because it's a brand new plan. And so I was able to sit down with the leader using that pay factors tool and look at all of our data, look at the total cash comp, look at the bonus for the receivers, and kind of get them where we needed to be for the budget and also where they wanted to be for their employees. And then that not only gave them the confidence to have conversations with the employees, but also build credibility, because what I'm saying is now backed up right there on the screen. We can see it together. There's no manipulation that I'm doing. There's no lens that I'm taking. This is straight data right here on the screen. And being able to show that and back up the words that I'm saying really built credibility with me, and then allowed that leader to build credibility with their employee that they are getting paid fairly for the work they're doing.
Yeah, so data's important.
It is important.
Kim, is data the answer to like breaking down these siloed discussions, getting a more unified
I
approach?
absolutely agree. I agree absolutely that that data piece is so important, because sometimes before we've built the credibility, if I say something, they know from my title, I must know compensation, and I have all the right letters behind my name that I'm a comp expert, but they still don't always believe me the first time. And so when I can bring, well, here's what this market data is saying, and here's like, here, you look with me. We do that a lot with benchmarking when they are questioning, you have the salary grade right? And I'm also going into pay factors and going, here's my matches. Feel free. Here's how we benchmark. This is the percentage we're looking for. Here's why we're trying to get a combination of these, and explaining to them, here's how we then use the data. That helps to give them a better lens to go, oh, okay, Kim knows what she's doing. I can trust the number she's coming with. She's not just pulling these numbers out of a hat. She's got real data sources to support what she's saying.
So you're both saying that the tool, without being an ad, because we never use Comp and Coffee as an advert for the products, but you're both saying the tools help, like Pay Factors helps build credibility. Why is it doing that? Do you want to?
I think anytime you can show objectively what the market is doing, showing that you are not bringing bias, that you are truly that unbiased business partner, I think builds that credibility or helps. I also enjoy the fact that it's kind of real time, like, and again, not sound like an advertisement, but verse and all those other pieces within pay factors of that data set, I can manipulate, and the leader in real time can say, "Oh, well, it's because you didn't take into account that we're in healthcare," and I can say, "Well, now that you mentioned that, allow me to apply this healthcare lens, and here's what the data shows. You can see we're still in line." Um, and lets them have a little bit of fun with the data too. They're like, okay, well, this employee came to me and said that they're getting recruited for this other industry. What is that industry paying? Help me prepare for these conversations, and helping the leader get ahead of those conversations to where they're already ready with the answers and the data, I think helps build those relationships.
Thank you, Hannah, for those insights. So we've talked about data, we've talked about training, we've talked about kind of like understanding both sides of the story. I think really, it's increasingly I'm seeing it's all stakeholders understanding the compensation story and it being one that everyone can believe in. So we all have our, we have data, we have pay ranges, but quite often we don't have a shared story about pay. And a strong compensation story can help explain how pay connects to business strategy, performance expectations, and the whole employee experience. And so you need that consistent story to be able to like foster employee trust, and help leaders communicate with confidence. And I think you've kind of been telling me about how you've been doing that in your organizations. Hannah, you support a large complex organization. What messages help people understand how pay supports the mission and goals of your organization?
We don't make widgets. We're not a factory that's putting out some kind of product. Our people are our product. Um, we have Trilogy has what we call a flywheel to success, and it starts with our employees. They're working in our residents' homes. They're building these relationships. That continuity of care is so incredibly important. When you have an aging loved one, knowing that this is your nurse and has been your nurse, and your nurse understands the idiosyncrasies of your dad or your mom or your grandma or whatnot is so incredibly important. So having that continuity of care through retention, through attracting the best talent that we can possibly attract. I don't care what anyone says. I could not, if for as much as working in healthcare as I am, I could never be a nurse. I could never do the work that these people are doing. And I get goosebumps when I think about what type of a person it takes to work in this type of an environment and situation. So I think it's actually pretty easy to connect what we're doing and our clinical and customer outcomes back to pay, and how that's one of the primary drivers of why people are at our work. It was one of the last annual meetings I was presenting, and I asked everybody to stand up. And I said, okay, if I told you that you're not going to get paid for today, we've decided this is volunteer only, would you stay? Like if you're leaving, if you're walking out the door, sit down. And we had some few sit. And if it's going to be a week long, I mean, we're not going to pay you for this entire week. Would you walk out the door? And they would. When it's all said and done, for as rewarding and fulfilling as your work is, for as good of a cause you are working for, when it's all said and done, you are at work for pay. So connecting those two, I think, are actually pretty easy for us over on this field.
And then, I mean, you talked about connecting people to the mission in your organization. Then what about business goals? Like, because ultimately you're running a business as well. So how do you explain to employees about how you're connecting what they're doing and how they're paid to business goals?
That's harder, right? As we have some of our clinicians and nurses and our CNAs, they're seeing the day to day. They're in it. They're doing med passes or tray passes. They're navigating health crises for individuals. So it can be very hard to say, let's look at recidivism and should this pause and think, should this person go out to a higher level of care or out to the hospital? Is this something that we can handle in house? Can be really hard to connect back to the business. When you're in that moment, you're not thinking about Trilogy's revenue, right? You're thinking about what's best for this human being in front of you. So I think sometimes we have to have a little bit of grace with our employees and our staff. We can do what we can to help them connect to the dots, but when it's all said and done, we want their focus to be on the residents in front of them. We want Trilogy's revenue to be the very last thing they think about when they're navigating situations and these humans that are in front of them. So we're walking a bit of a fine line between helping them connect to business goals. We absolutely want them part of our mission and our values and our service standards, but when it comes to the business goals, that's kind of one of the last things we want them to think about on purpose.
Okay. And Kim, in your role, you're often coaching leaders on how to communicate pay decisions. For you, what turns an explanation into a story that feels credible and repeatable that managers can use?
Sure. So one of the fun tools that we have here is we do a compensation essentials training. And it's for managers and above. And the last part of the training is, what does a good pay conversation look like? And what does a bad conversation pay like? And so we start with you're going to go have your performance and merit conversation. And what does a bad conversation look like? And it's like cringe-worthy bad. So the associate goes to you, how did you come up with my new pay? And the manager goes, I don't know. It's what HR told me. It's on the Excel. That's what the Excel spreadsheet says. And they go like, oh yeah, like I would never want to have a conversation like that. Like that would make me very uncomfortable. And so then we go to here's what a good conversation is. So, oh, well, based on how long you've been in your role and here's how you're performing in your job, here's what your pay is. And then they go, well, how do I make more? And then you can go into a career development conversation. And so it's making the pay conversations. What we're teaching leaders is make it about the person. The person wants to know about themselves. As a leader, you need to know how it works in a business, but to an individual, it's really all about them and you have to bring it down to their level. So by making it the fun conversations of here's what a bad one looks like and here's what a good one looks like, it makes it memorable for them. And then we give them enough information to go, here's when you want to ask for help. Here's when to call in HR. Here's when to call in compensation. And we're here to help. Like you can always pick up the phone and call us and talk to us.
So have you seen a difference? Like, have you seen a difference in the organization by managers going through that training, like less employees concerns or maybe reduced turnover? Like, is it having an impact?
We've had this in place for many years. And so it actually really helps to reduce the amount of times that managers have to come to us because it's really that frequently asked questions kind of a training that they can refer back to at any time. And that's really helps. And then they stay really close with their HR leaders and we really train our HR leaders really well to have compensation conversations. And then they know when something kind of sounds off and when, hey, maybe we should give Kim a call and it's early and how do we work through and navigate this problem?
Yeah. I mean, it's so helpful because conversations about pay can be just super awkward, and historically when we didn't train managers about how to have pay conversations and we were less clear about how pay was determined, then, they were really just, a lot of the time conversations that people didn't want to have basically, because it was a lot of looking down at your shoes and kind of not really wanting to like deal with the topic in hand. And Hannah, what frameworks are you using at Trilogy Health then in terms of helping to get these consistent compensation narratives and helping managers to talk about pay?
Business continuity is so important when it comes to compensation and having our employees have the same experience regardless of what leaders are talking to. And that's one of the biggest challenges we're facing. We know that each kind of section of the company has a different focus, right? We talked about that towards the beginning. So whenever we're building any kind of tools or um, frameworks or guides or anything like that, we're trying to make sure that we're bringing kind of all four HR, finance, ops, legal all together into one thing. So we're giving that the equity, the stability, the clarity, the flexibility, and the speed all in one kind of tool. It's easy to understand. And I will say that before we roll anything out, we do treat it very much like product design. So we're collecting feedback, we're, adjusting and stress testing and, tooling it, training it, and only then are we rolling out. For as much as we have been around, and then we're a 25-year-old company, so we're not incredibly old. We've grown very, very quickly. And so we are still trying to mature the compensation function. We are trying to get all those frameworks rolled out that a traditional, very large, multi-billion-dollar company would have. We're trying to create wage scales that make sense and that our leaders can use and can apply. And we're trying to teach them how to speak comp and how to speak comp strategy and comp philosophy, like we've talked about. And it's a battle. You have a finance person and you give them a wage scale, and they think the minimum is where you start. So having that conversation and explaining how to use those tools and how to apply those frameworks is really important. And that's kind of where some of our guides and things like that come into play.
Well, thank you, both of you, for sharing those insights today. Well, obviously, as we're recording this, we're getting to the end of 2025, the end of the year. Is there anything that's top of your agenda, both of you, in terms of helping to improve understanding of compensation, alignment of understanding next year? Kim, what's top of your agenda for next year?
So on our agenda, it's definitely it's more education, it's more compensation education. And so we're having lots of talks of how much farther down into the business we take it and how do you have those conversations with individual contributors and how do we start to teach them. And one of the reasons it's such a big focus is we've got 500 stores across the US. And so there's lots of different pay transparency laws and different ones that feel like are popping up every day. And because we're in those locations, it's affecting us. So as more and more of our population is in one of those jurisdictions, we just know how much more pay education and people understanding how pay decisions are made and how pay is individual to them is just going to help us grow and help build trust and transparency within our organization too.
Just spreading that pay transparency through the organization. And Hannah, you're top of the to-do list here for 26?
It's the same. It's education. Our employees are more armed to have pay conversations than ever. So even with our leaders having been the most trained that they could possibly be trained, that calm landscape is just changing. We now have generative AI. We have pay transparency. That means that ranges are posted. We have those job board sites that are either you give them a range or they're going to make one up for you. We have all of these things that our employees are coming with armed. And so getting our leaders prepared to have those conversations, not just with a script and here are some key talking points and FAQs, which we absolutely do provide, but also how to think on the spot uh, with that straight face test, right? If our employees come to us with a problem and our leaders feel like they're needing to make things up on the fly, then that's going to create that kind of icky situation between the employee and their manager. So getting all the way down as far as we can, Kim, like you mentioned, we're not quite to individual contributor yet, but getting all of our people managers as educated and as fluent so that they can have these conversations without anybody feeling icky is absolutely top of my list.
Yeah. And it's so important, organizations don't succeed because they're the ones that pay the most. Organizations succeed when employees have trust in pay. And then that trust obviously translates to engagement, and your employees kind of want to be part of your story and part of your organization. So really fostering that a cross-functional alignment of understanding between HR, finance, legal and leadership and employees, so that we're kind of all speaking the same language is so important because it's very much a question of trust. So a big thank you, Hannah and Kim, for joining me today. It's been a great discussion. Really enjoyed hearing real life stories from inside your own organizations. And thank you all for listening in today. If you want to influence where compensation is heading next, you can join thousands of practitioners contributing to this year's Pay Scales Compensation Best Practice Survey. So we're currently fielding that. We've got a few more weeks, or I think actually probably about a week left as we record this episode. So the link to taking part in the CBPR study is in the show notes. And if you have anything that you would like us to talk about or any feedback on this episode, then you can email us at coffee@payscale.com. And we'd love to hear from you. But just to say a final thank you, Hannah and Kim, for joining me today. Thank you.